Hola, buenos días.
Ay, sí funciona ahora, qué guay.
¿Cómo estás?
Bien, ¿tú?
Muy bien, gracias.
Tanto tiempo, perdona que es que hoy sí voy un poco. A ver, espérame un segundo. Ah, un mes y luego me llamas. ¿Estás grabando esto?
Sí, lo estoy grabando simplemente para tener la grabación audio y poder escribirla en vez de
Vale,
escribir
guay.
tus respuestas mientras que hacemos la entrevista. ¿Te convendría más
Va.
hacerla ahora o quieres hacer la entrevista la semana que viene?
No, ¿por qué? ¿Por qué la semana que viene?
Ah, no, te preguntaba porque pensé que tenías un día muy ocupado. No sabía si tenías tiempo.
Sí, no, pero va a ser así y peor cada semana de este año de absoluta locura que se me viene encima. Así que nunca dejes para mañana lo que podemos hacer hoy, Andrés.
Exactamente,
Ok,
exactamente.
lo que sí no he podido verme bien, a ver, espera, las preguntas, pero si quieres ir preguntándome, estaba leyendo tu presentación muy guapa
Gracias.
eh, y estaba viendo tus research questions. Entonces, lo que tú quieres, contribute to Civic Tech, tarara, y tus preguntas son how how digital tools could be adapted to a community engagement strategy by Harlem Children's Zones in St. Nicholas Houses. B, how the proposed strategy for community engagement in Central Harlem could be extrapolated to low-income urban communities throughout the United States. O sea, que tienes dos partes. Una primera que es de cómo integramos Civic Tech al problema específico de esta comunidad y luego una segunda pregunta que tiene que ver con la escalabilidad, ¿no?
Exactamente.
Entonces, déjame leer la mission rápido y luego vamos con las preguntas y cambiamos al inglés, ¿sí? To explore digital technology and enhance to community engagement, design engagement strategy, da, da, da. To extrapolate, vale, got it, strategy. To interview practitioners, da, 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 da. To implement participatory planning, da, 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 da. To create a manual digital community engagement for municipal engine, perfecto, molto bene. Ok, está muy bonita tu presentación, ojalá mis alumnos hicieran cosas así. Information and Service Community Pride Accountability. Vale, ok, got it. Entonces, como no voy a tener tiempo de leerme las preguntas,
Las preguntas son muy sencillas y es más una conversación informal que una entrevista formal. Era simplemente para tener algunas preguntas que guíen la conversación y luego poder a través de Google Hangouts grabar la conversación para poder escribirla después. Entonces no te preocupes, no, esta conversación no va a estar en YouTube para el
no
futuro.
pasa nada. O sea, hay cada cosa mía en YouTube que mira.
Pero me pareció una excelente herramienta que no había usado antes, entonces a ver si funciona.
Ah, sí, nosotros lo usamos mucho.
El Google Hangout on Air.
Sí, sí,
Ah,
sí.
qué chévere. Bueno,
Bueno.
entonces cambiamos a inglés.
Mhm. At what stage are you in your thesis? Have you already done the interviews and like the whole iterative process of human-centered design?
So we are, or I am, along with my thesis advisor, in the initial phases of the thesis.
Okay.
I started pre-thesis, which was a research phase of the thesis project last semester, and that is to say that the thesis project, in terms of its design, will actually start this semester. It means if you see my girlfriend passing by, don't worry.
No,
I'll
no problem.
on our interview. I'm in her apartment in New York City before classes start. So, like I said before, this is the initial phase of the thesis, which means that it is still within the brainstorming phase, meaning that I am collecting a toolkit that I would like to then explore and develop in order to test with the Harlem Children's Zone, essentially in real time, assess the results, and then be able to create a manual not only to share with the Harlem Children's Zone, but also with other nonprofits and municipal agencies in the US. the US being the context of the thesis.
Okay. Okay, so create a strategy. Okay, very good. So how can I be useful to you?
So the first question being, Ideas for Change promotes civic engagement in many cities with different characteristics. What are the greatest challenges that these cities face in common? What is the common denominator that you have faced through your projects despite the different contexts?
Okay, so I wear two hats. On the one hand, I am a scholar at University College London, and my research is on community engagement with civic tech. And many studies that I have conducted within the context of academia do not pertain to the domain of ideas for change and could be also very useful to you. On the other hand, as you know, I'm director of research at Ideas for Change, and within Ideas for Change, I'm more of I'm a consultant. So I apply the research that I do in academia in order to solve specific tasks of clients who approach us with specific issues. So I think that I could talk to you about challenges associated to community engagement in cities from both perspectives, things that I've seen in academia and things that I've seen in Ideas for Change, because within Ideas for Change, then the scope would be a lot more limited to what our clients want us to solve from them. Right. So the issue that you are trying to tackle, it's pretty much a common issue within industrialized societies in big cities. Is the issue of disenfranchised youth, the issue of exclusion and lack of equality in terms of access to opportunities. And also, for example, in the city of Bristol that I am very intensely working with, we have very similar issues with regards to low-income communities who are facing problems such as obesity, underemployment, or unemployment, and in some cases, very, very low performance in education. So this is exactly something that I think you are trying to tackle. And the challenge in there is how to reach out to these communities and how to create strategies that really make them feel part of something. Right. And in this context, you are going to see that I think you will come across this issue as well, because I've seen it as a common denominator, as I'm saying, that obesity, low income, lack of opportunities, and underemployment or unemployment and low performance in school are typically linked to social isolation as well.
It is interesting to hear you mention those main challenges, given that they are precisely the ones that the Harlem community is currently facing, and precisely the ones that the civic engagement strategy aims to address by creating a higher degree of engagement and therefore access to these resources. Are there meta strategies? Are there main strategies that you implement despite the different contexts, which I would assume would become more fine-tuned for every single problem?
Yes. So the aim of my thesis, for example, in my PhD, was to create a taxonomy for participation and to identify what are the drivers for sustained community engagement and how can we scale up these interventions. So I wanted to find this common denominator that could map onto different communities. In London, for example, we have the very similar issues like the ones you're talking about. In Bristol, even in Latin America, although slightly different. I think that there are a few themes, we call them sensitizing themes, which have emerged from my research in this. And these themes, I consider the drivers for community engagement. And of course, you might need to, you can start using this as a framework to kind of create a frame for your research. But then, of course, you need to find what the sweet spot is in the context of your community, which is going to have very particular needs and aspects. And that's why you're going to use user-centered design to get there and include them into in the process. So to me, one of the first aspects is ownership. How do we, in communities that are largely disenfranchised and disengaged, there's a problem of ownership. How do you make them feel part of something? And how do you make them feel a sense of interdependency? So whatever they do has an impact on the outcomes of what the collective achieves. And they do matter. Whatever they do actually matter. This is very relevant because we come from a tradition in the 80s and in the 90s where sometimes the state or experts would position themselves as saying, we know more than you, and we bring this recipe, this solution, which is the recipe, and if you do what I'm telling you to do, then you're going to improve. And by not creating a sense of ownership, then that creates opportunities for disengagement in the long term. And there's nothing, yeah, sorry.
It's very interesting to hear that you mention the state as an expert that imposes a recipe. In the context of the US, it has been a recipe for the disaster in the 1960s with urban renewal, when thriving minority and low-income neighborhoods were essentially demolished for the sake of a new state. In the case of New York City and Boston, where vibrant neighborhoods were unfortunately demolished for state institutions.
Yeah, and this is the issue. That's why the issue of ownership is so relevant, because how can you demolish something? It's like the most opposite thing to creating a sense of ownership and making ownership, a sense of ownership and agency. What I do has an impact in my life, has an impact in the community. These two concepts are key to developing a sense of empowerment. A sense of empowerment, of course, comes from within, right? From having agency in the world and having the awareness that I am responsible for my actions and I can contribute. And this creates a sense of responsibility. If you remove this, you're removing the drivers that give us the energy to do things.
And how do you think that this communal sense of agency and responsibility could be created within a community, especially through means of human-centered design and storytelling? How could these two tools?
Yeah, before we go into that, I'll tell you a few more factors that I think are very relevant to this. So ownership is one. The second one is that I'd say it is linked to ownership, that you encourage appropriation, which means that you may come up with a set of possible solutions, but what you want to see is how they appropriate those solutions to their own situated purposes, how they take whatever you bring and integrate it into their daily practices. So appropriation is a good sign of a sense of ownership. The third one, which is crucial, is to foster social connectedness, social interactions. So you may, and this kind of answers your questions as well, because I'm saying these are the drivers for you to produce engagement and make this engagement sustain. So although you will be working with online tools like social media and so on, you want to make sure that you create opportunities for people to meet in face-to-face situations, because there's huge evidence to support that facilitating shared encounters in face-to-face settings fosters a sense of belonging and the responsibility and the pleasure of being part of something. And this leads to two very positive outcomes, which is it fosters social norms, which are and peer pressure. These two are known to encourage behavior change. So if you isolate people, I don't know, we are built, configured to be social beings. We learn by interacting with others. We are nothing with others. We become depressed if we are alone. So when you create little social groups, if you foster good practices among these groups, you'll see the emergence of social norms and peer pressure. Social norms is that my community or everybody in my community is trying to recycle plastic bottles. If I don't do it, then my community is going to reject me. I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to feel like a free rider. I want to be part of this. So I start recycling. And the same happens with peer pressure. Like all my mates, I stick to social norms because of peer pressure. My peers are all engaging in something, and to not do this makes me feel not part of them, and this is not cool because I want to belong. So of course, this could be taken totally on the wrong side, and that's how criminal communities operate, applying the same norms. So you want to foster the behaviors that are desirable for this community, and then create opportunities for social interactions to facilitate the emergence of these behaviors. That's very important. And another thing, there are many factors, but the last one that I think is interesting, it's community pride. How do you foster a sense of achievement that will lead to a sense of community pride? And there are many easy that you can identify the low-hanging fruit here. But for example, one of them is if you have media coverage. If you have media coverage about an intervention that was pushed forward by communities, and then people are talking about these things, it creates a sense of, oh wow, I did it, I was involved with that. And it creates this situation where people start sharing, talking about things. And what you want is to start a positive conversation about the impact that the community is having. And this will create a sense of community pride, which is known to sustain engagement.
I'm very interested in these last two topics that you have elaborated on, because they are precisely what is lacking or what could be strengthened in the Harlem community. I wonder if you could elaborate on one of the ideas for change projects, which is crowd memo.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
It's very interesting because to me it seems like an intergenerational storytelling project that creates a community pride, that creates a sense of social capital, but more interestingly, through an intergenerational project, given that if we were to isolate one generation, for example, youth, only socializing with youth, certain undesirable activities may be perpetrated, as opposed to the interaction between a grandchild and his or her grandmother.
Yeah, well, the crowd memo was a very powerful project in the sense that we managed to help a community address a local issue that was heritage preservation and lack of engagement from school children. So it was the
Mara.
Hi. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Alison.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry, we're using a bit of your time for this.
Yeah, no.
She had a late night. She works at MoMA, and she had a press release to work on.
No, we had a dress rehearsal of a performance.
A performance rehearsal. So she's having a late morning.
Oh, poor thing. You need to have a nap.
Yeah, tell my boss that. Well, good luck, guys. Nice.
Thank you very much. So one of the cool things about Crowd Memo was that they people in the town, this is a rural a town in rural Argentina, and as many similar towns, they're facing the issue of heritage preservation. Everything's changing very quickly, and they feel like they're losing their identity. And the other concern was that children didn't care about this. So they were too interested in their mobile phones and Xboxes, and one day they were going to realize that they had grown up and the town had disappeared and they didn't know where they come from. So this is a concern that is not coming from the community of interest, from the children. This is a concern that's coming from those who actually contacted us. And these are people like the school teachers, the director of the school, people involved with heritage preservation and so on. So we needed to create, the question was, how do we enable a process where children become interested in learning more about their town and doing something that will help them preserve their heritage? And so the first factor that we thought of was we need to go and find them where they are. We need to use the tools that they enjoy using. You can't just say, okay, you're going to do what I tell you to do the way I tell you to do it, and then expect them to engage.
Especially about something that they're not interested in the first place.
Exactly. So that was a challenge. So we said, okay, what are they interested in, actually? Well, they are interested in mobile phones, and they're interested in movies. And they do care about their town because this is where they live. But we need to make sure that this is not an abstract concept, heritage. We need to do something that connects the idea of the town, the memories of the town, what makes the town relevant, with the physical space that they relate to on a daily basis. So how do we do this? And so we decided to start with them, from them. And they were organized in groups and they were asked to have a debate with their peers on which were the places that they thought were important. So this is very important because this is aimed at creating a sense of ownership. It's not the towns, and we were very hardcore on this. We were all the time discussing this with the teachers. Do not push the children to choose the places that you think should be protected, because we want to create a sense of ownership. So that means that they need to feel like they are agents of change. And for that to happen, they need to be dealing with places that they care about.
And was there an overlap in terms of the places the children chose versus and the places that the students and the historical preservationists chose?
That was very interesting because we created a series of loops to filter out the choice of the children. So they started by choosing, and then they had to go home and talk to their parents and their siblings, because we wanted to maximize the outreach of the project.
Right.
And so when they chose among themselves, then they went home and they said, we think that, at school, we are planning this project. We're going to use our mobile phones and a film. We're going to learn how to make films to protect our places. And we had to choose our places, and we choose about this. What do you think? And then the siblings and the parents were saying, no, remember this place is important because your granny got married there. And so now the places start becoming something that that relates to the family history. And so they start to think of, oh yeah, maybe that place is cool, it's true, and maybe I am interested in knowing more about that place because I didn't. So it's not just like, this is a typical mistake that you could come across if you just run user-centered design, that you think that just what they tell you is what they want. But if you manage to include some other cycles, iterate the ideas, the initial ideas a bit more, and that they are the ones iterating the ideas, then you can come to much more insightful outcomes, particularly if you include people in their own circles. Right. So when all the students did that with their families, and they came back to school and they had a new discussion with their teachers. And together they chose, they ended up choosing 9 places. And the funny thing is that the elderly wanted to preserve the church, for example, and kids didn't give a shit, and the church did not end up being one of the places that we worked on. For example, they were very interested they all knew that there used to be a riverside resort. And so but they never got to see it because it was abandoned. So they all wanted to rescue that place. So that's how we created a sense of ownership in the situation. And then, of course, the content of the documentary was said we don't want the children to go and look for the stories of these places in history books. We want the real thing that makes them important, which is the memories of the town. And that's how we enable this intergenerational dialogue, which proved to be amazing. It created lots of really strong interdependencies among those involved in the project.
Now, did you find that there was mutual learning? That is to say, the children became more appreciative of historical preservation sites, while the entities of historical preservation became more knowledgeable about marketing and social media? And to what degree did the entities of historical preservation continue the project independently? For instance, did they adopt social media in order to continue the project? Did they perform in a different way?
That is a good question, because so 2 things. The first one is that for you to create a sense of ownership, you need to identify what form of value is your intervention going to deliver for each of those stakeholders involved. And you need to be very good at fine-tuning this. So in our case, we identified that engagement was huge with the project because the project was delivering value to all the stakeholders in different ways. For the children, it was about being able to use mobile technologies and film in the context of school. And in school, these technologies and these mediums are typically not allowed. They're not allowed to bring their phones within the classroom. So this was an opportunity where they could do something that to them was fun, while at the same time learning and interacting with others and getting more, developing a relationship with the physical space. For the elderly, it created opportunities to share their stories, which for people who are above 60s, this becomes very, very relevant to create a sense of legacy. What am I leaving? You know, I feel like I'm going to die soon. I want my voice to be heard, and so on. For teachers at the school, it created another form of value, which was they are being pressured by local governments to integrate new technologies within their teaching practices. But they have very little skills to do that. So this project allowed them to learn new skills with regards to digital media and to update their teaching practices. So this also created a form of value for them, and of course to have the children engaged. For the parents of the children, this also created opportunities of creative value, because they got to do something with the children at school and felt involved with the whole project. And they were also facilitating stories and contacts. And what we got from them, we asked them to go to their family archives and get as many pictures of these places as possible. So everybody in the town was trying to get these pictures. And again, when you want to generate a sense of community, there's the little things that are more powerful than memory and that shared memory, those things that remind us the fact that we belong to this place and that there's this agency. So yeah, this is one thing, right? The project created, there was mutual learning, but because the project was providing value, and that we very carefully kind of like knit this into the project just to make sure that we would deliver this value. And this is something that you can do following user-centered approaches, because only by using user-centered approaches and running some ethnographic studies, you will be able to know what they are expecting from the project.
Right. And are there ways in which such a project could become long-lasting? That is to say, are there strategies for either institutionalizing or somehow embedding this project into the classes, into an after-school activity, into a museum resource, and so on?
Yes, so this is a very, very important aspect. So just to finish the last, because you asked me something about storytelling. Right. In my approach, I link storytelling to social interactions, because if you think about it, actually storytelling fosters social interactions, and it creates a sense of connectedness, although it's not face-to-face, it's distal. And that's also important. Little things are more moving than storytelling. And we are storytelling machines. This is how we evolved as humans. What makes us different from other species is the fact that we have capacity for storytelling. So it's always a fantastic strategy. So what is a key driver for the sustainability of the survival of any community intervention? And this is what I call championing. So when you are pushing an intervention forward, even if you make it really centered in the community, even if anything, it is your personal energy and desire for this to work that pushes the action forward. Now, at some point, you're going to leave. And you cannot underestimate the massive impact that your form of leadership has in the success of the intervention. So you need to work with local champions. Local champions are those who draw others to the interaction, have a form of leadership in the community that makes others want to join, makes others want to do things. If you think about any social group, even your group of friends, you'll see that there's always a champion. That guy who's like calling and making sure that we all join, that people don't lag behind and leave and so on. So championing creates a soft form of power, a soft form of leadership that has huge impact in the continuity of any social process. So you cannot be the community champion, because to begin with, you're not part of the community.
Right.
So you need to find champions that are going to work with you, making sure that they attract interest from the community. But then the sort of champion that the problem, the dark side of championing, well, there are many dark sides. Of course, you know, their own desires may clash with the values of the intervention and so on. But apart from that, you can't put all the weight of the continuation of the intervention on the champion's back unless you reward that person for their participation. So you're more likely to succeed if championing comes from an institution that will be there, or a number of institutions, an assemblage of groups of activists, community groups, institutions, and individual champions. So to identify who your champions are, who can, kind of carry out some championing in your intervention, you need to follow human-centered, user-centered approaches, and you need to be very be very good as an ethnographer to kind of identify where the leadership is, and then make sure that no matter, even if these people leave, the institution has an interest in continuing this, and will find another champion. So championing, key.
Definitely. And before we move on to the next question, would you mind elaborating or clarifying what the terms storytelling and user-centered design are? Because they have become ubiquitous, yet relatively vague. So what does it mean to employ storytelling? What does it mean to work in user-centered design?
Okay, so the way I understand user-centered design, or not the way I understand, the way I use is, to me, is a method, and it's a way of looking at things that takes into account the main characters makes the story revolve around the main characters of the intervention and not yourself. So I use it as a method as well, not just a way of looking at things, but also a method that gives me a very clear set of actions that help you deliver something that has put the user needs in the center and the user expectations in the center. So as a method, I always start with ethnography, observing what they do. And once I have this set of sensitizing themes that kind of help me frame what the problem is and where some of the solutions might be, then I start running user-centered design approach, where I start conducting interviews, and then groups, and we use workshop dynamics to discuss these sensitizing themes that emerged from the first part of the research. And the important thing is that it doesn't mean that the whole process needs to come from them. You are the one orchestrating the process. But what you need to make sure is that you don't embed, although that's hard to do, you really don't try to embed your expectations and your needs in the process. You're really good at listening and driving some insights from what your users have not said, because there's a misunderstanding that user-centered design is what they say they want. User-centered design implies a process of abstraction that comes from the person orchestrating the actions, which is you, from the researcher, who is going to apply methods to process the data that comes through the user-centered design cycles, and make interpretations that add a layer of abstraction and are more generalizable. Not necessarily what the user says he wants is directly what will make him engage with the intervention. So yeah, for me, user-centered design is a method, and the method entails the things that I just described. Storytelling, to me, can be summarized as stories that are created to be shared. It's not just the narrative, and it's just not the content, it's the aim, the intention with which this has been created. There's an intention to share that. A personal diary may not be a form of storytelling. It's a form of introspection, provided in a written format. But to me, something very, very important is that this the intention within the narrative. That's what makes storytelling, because it creates a sense of shared purpose, and it creates a sense of commonality and community. So these shared narrations, or narrations that are built, created with the sense of community belonging and to be shared.
And like you have mentioned before, the distribution of the story or narrative is as important as the content of the narrative itself. You know, for example, how is the content created, and how is it shared or distributed amongst different sectors, perhaps disenfranchised sectors of a community. And I think another very interesting question within design is, how do we combine both, the human touch with the data-driven rigor? For example, how do you, as a designer and a strategist, combine user-centered design with open data, digital technology, and so on and so forth?
Okay, this is a really interesting question, and this is where I think you really have an opportunity to become extremely creative and to include local artists, for example, to work with you, to come up with something that is insightful. I'll tell you, I could speak for a long time about this, but I think I can give you 2 ideas that were very successful for me. So the first one is try to infuse a sense of novelty. The novelty effect is huge in terms of creating a sense of engagement. So by novelty, I mean the story can be old, it could be Cinderella, but if you create an immersive, novel experience about it, it will make people interested, even if they already know the story. So this, how you tell the story, how you create opportunities for this story to be lived in an exciting way, to be experienced in a way that's novel, is a question that you should really try to tackle with a lot of creativity, and if you can, even including others in the community, so that they feel part of this process and they have something that they want to show to others, that they feel proud of. And digital media, new technologies can provide huge opportunities for you to create this sort of like performatic storytelling that has a huge novelty effect. The second aspect is create opportunities for shared encounters. This means if you make interventions in the public space, for example, you want to create 2 things. You want to create opportunities for people to meet as they experience your story and talk to strangers. You want to create an excuse for people to talk. This is very important because it creates, this is how you create communities. But you can't create communities, but you can foster a sense of community by facilitating shared encounters. And there are a lot of reasons why we do not talk to people in public spaces. This is basically something, a very sophisticated protocol of behavior that we have developed living in cities. It's called the non-interaction rule, and it's been researched since the 70s, or even before that, and it makes people not to want to engage with others because we're already too busy coping with the amount of stimuli in cities. So in cities, it's very hard to foster social interactions in the public space because we are set up to not interact with strangers. Now, there are a few situations that can break the rule of non-interaction. One is if you something highly unexpected happens, or something that's funny or sometimes scary. So you might be at the bus stop with this person this familiar stranger, this person that you see there every day, and because you see the person there every day, you would never say hello to them.
Right.
There's something worse than being a stranger, that's being a familiar stranger, seriously. With these people, we just really want to avoid all form of contact. So the problem in communities, in cities, is that there are a lot of familiar strangers, people that you know, you've seen them before, but you just can't go over the anxiety of talking to them. So 2 things that can break the rule of non-interaction. One, if you see that familiar stranger in a totally different context, right, in Rome, you're like, oh my God. And the second one is if something, a highly unexpected event takes place.
Right.
It could be a car crash, it could be somebody that's walking and whacks his head against something, and then you go like, something like kind of breaks the ice. So within human-computer interaction, for example, we have dedicated a lot of research trying to understand what are those icebreakers? How can we facilitate social interactions? So I think that you have an opportunity here, because you can both invent a form of, or co-create with them a form of, a way of sharing the stories that both delivers novelty, creates a novelty effect, so people are attracted to it and they talk about it and it creates more engagement. And the second thing, that it becomes an icebreaker and foster conversations among familiar strangers. And once you have had a conversation with a familiar stranger, the next time you see them, you're going to say hello. So if you want to, in the context of the community that you're talking about, this seems to be particularly relevant to foster these forms of micro conversation in a very situated way. And if you also create excuses for them to talk about specific, so if the stories revolve around issues that you want them to talk about, then this is an opportunity to create awareness around these topics and get them to start talking. And this is, again, a situation that to you should not be seen as a result of the intervention, but you should actively be gathering data, because the stuff that they talk about when you break the ice may be more relevant than the stuff you gathered in the first iteration of your human-centered design approach.
And what are ways in which data could be gathered in a productive way besides surveys?
I think that surveys are really tricky. So surveys are not, in rigor, a form of qualitative research. They're considered to be quantitative because when you survey people, your intention is to quantify opinions. So I think that you need a mixed methods approach, and you really need to go for interviews and for ethnography. Your observations and your interviews and talking to people. And you can also, I'm sure most of your target group is online. So if you could go and see in which groups they are involved and what they talk about, what they're interested in, you'll see that they're interested in all the things that any teenager would be interested in. They're interested in sex, in music, in things that you have done yourself when you were their age. So it's not so hard. If you empathy is a very important thing in human-centered design. So if you focus a little bit on trying to empathize with them, things they're going through, you are going to understand where you can find them and how you can get data from them. And I think that an interesting thing to do, particularly with the age group that you're going to be dealing with, is to interview them together as a focus group, and then individually you'll see a massive change of discourse, and you need both of them, both of those situations to collect data. And also you need those who translate. You need to talk to champions, those who translate, because they know they can translate what the kids mean. I said, no, and they're telling you that because last year somebody did this, and that's why they all keep on saying the blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh shit, thanks God I know this, because it helps you understand.
And it seems like the process of collecting data, whether it be through qualitative or quantitative means, is also part of the process of engagement. It seems like engagement in general is a process as opposed to an end product. But I wonder, But I wonder at what point, especially in my thesis, should I start to test out, given that it is essentially a 4-month project, in terms of pacing and timing. At what point should I start executing the strategy itself? Or do you think that it would be more productive to gather data through my thesis, create a handbook or a manual for engagement that then these champions could actually begin to execute?
I think the second, both options are valid, but the second one is going to prove more useful. So you want to maximize the the data gathering process. So you can be the only one collecting data. But I just thought of something that would be so fantastic for you. So let me tell you very briefly about the work of Bill Gaver. So Bill Gaver is a guy is a researcher at Goldsmith University here in London. And he created a process for engagement and data collection called cultural prose. Have you heard of it?
I haven't.
Okay, so how do you want to run a project around community engagement, but to begin with, you need to engage them,
right,
to understand them. So that's a chicken and egg problem, right? So he developed a toolkit that's beautiful, that has a lot of objects and are aimed at collecting data without you invading these people. So for example, there's a little notebook where you write your dreams. So you deliver this toolkit in all the houses. And the toolkit has a lot of little objects. It's really, really cute, and it makes you want to do something with it. It has a little disposable camera, and it asks you to make pictures of your most precious objects, for example. It has the little dreams booklet where you wake up every morning and you write your dreams. It has these postcards for you to send the postcards to somebody who you really love or who you really miss. And it has this little thing that you hang. It's like a hanger with a notepad that you put you hook in the door of the toilet. And while you're in the toilet, you can write things that you're thinking of in there and so on. So the interesting thing is that it allows you to very creatively capture very nuanced data, kind of fragments of data that when you put them together will give you a very interesting idea of who lives there, who that person is. And that's definitely a method that I recommend you check out. Then people are asked to give the box back after a period of time. You may not have all the time that is required to do an intervention like that, but you can appropriate some ideas in there. And for example, the idea of sending a postcard to someone that you miss engages with storytelling, because it's a shared story, and also could help you gather data that people would be unlikely to share with you if you ask them directly. So you can use these methods as you run the focus groups and the interviews and so on. You could also do these more creative methods. The other thing that was done in Bristol when the community I'm working with was trying to tackle a problem that's very similar to yours, they decided that the way to engage them to tackle the problem of social isolation and disengagement was to get them to make a documentary themselves about social isolation in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So they distributed cameras and they very much very similar to what I did with Crowd Memo, where you train them so that you actually enable a platform for story sharing, and then they feel a sense of ownership. And this documentary, I'm going to try to find it for you. So I'm going to try to send you the things from Bill Gaver and also from KWMC. They ended up making an interactive documentary about social isolation, which of course, kind of just for doing it and gathering to watch it, it was working against social isolation. It was fostering social interactions, and these people who worked in there ended up just forming a group of friends, right?
One of the values that I find in this particular mindset or approach is, like you mentioned, the fact that by creating a documentary on social isolation by the community, you foster community engagement, as opposed to a designer or filmmaker creating a documentary about social isolation, which is then screened at an independent movie theater, where people like us would watch the documentary feel bad, feel good that we watched it, and ultimately do nothing about it, given that we may not have the agency to do so. So that in terms of storytelling, you have hit the nail on the head in terms of the distribution being as important as the creation of the content.
Exactly.
And a paradigmatic shift in paradigm that I've become more aware of lately. As a designer, it is very easy to somehow personalize the project as opposed to allowing the community to be the center of it.
Exactly. So, and this is part of what I think. That's why I say that to me, user-centered design is an approach, but it's also a method. You can really do the things by following user-centered design in all its forms, engaging people in their means of production as well. We had a very beautiful project here actually my colleague with whom I did this is in New York. I could get you in touch with him. He's amazing. We have the same situation. Disenfranchised children, teenagers in a low-income community in Barcelona. And we trained them, and they created their own soap opera called La novela El Culebrón del Barrio, Al Culebrón del Barri in Catalan. And then another one that was called Quedem, because Quedem means queremos in Catalan, but they spell it very funny, and because that's how they type it in WhatsApp.
Right.
And so we made a soap opera about the neighborhood and like their love affairs and why they were broken hearted. It's like there was like proper film director and script writer and like makeup artist. We recruited all these people. They had to apply to the positions by sending videos via YouTube. We trained them. They created their own script, and they made this soap opera in chapters to be consumed via mobile phones. It was a huge success. Not only did they consume it, watched it via mobile phones, but they also shared it. But we also screened it so they could invite all their parents. They were so proud that they had done that. And so Al Culebrón del Barri and Quedem are, again, two examples where we use storytelling to foster a sense of local engagement. But not only that, also we created opportunities for them to learn skills that had an impact on their employability, because then they could go and find jobs, as you know, they actually did learn stuff. They how to produce audiovisual content, to record audio, to edit the videos, and so on. It was very heavy in terms of the whole deployment of the project, but the reward, it was pretty powerful. I could send you data on that as well, and I can connect you to Pablo because he's in New York.
Is he based in New York?
Yes, he actually. So this was a community interest organization called Colectivo Piloto, and now they have moved to New York, and they are doing these things in Brooklyn.
That would be great to get in touch with them.
I can definitely get you in touch with him, and I helped him with Quedem and with El Culebrón del Barri. I had just arrived in Barcelona. This was kind of my first job in Barcelona, and his whole life, for the last 20 years, he's been doing this. So he's a real expert, and he's a film director himself. So I will connect you. I'm writing this down with Pablo Herrera. Okay.
Well, Marta, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
I think I need at least a couple of days to digest the information, especially in terms of how to approach or how to rethink my thesis approach, given that I have to be realistic about the limitations or the framework in terms of resources and time, and also whether or not I would be able to extend my thesis after this semester, but I should conceive it as being a 4-month project, and I have to very carefully assess and define what my goals are. Whether I focus more on the collection of data through quantitative and qualitative means. Is it a question of both data as well as beginning to implement certain engagement strategies and so on? But that is something that I have to sit down and do before I even start. Are there any other tips in terms of how?
Yes, one that I just thought of.
Yeah, especially within the context of a disenfranchised community, urban community in New York City.
You have to manage expectations from the very, very, very beginning, not only for yourself and your supervisors, particularly for the community. Because every time you're going to involve people, and this is going to require some efforts on them, on their side, they do it with expectation that this will deliver something for them. And you need to all the time manage expectations, because you don't want them to be disappointed that the intervention didn't deliver anything of value to them. They gave you all this data, they came to these workshops, and this isn't great opportunity. So it's like, try to set up the goals of the intervention with them, knowing that these are boxes that you will be able to try to identify some quick wins. The local teachers will say, well, for me, if they learn how to use blah, for me, that's enough. And you say, okay, I'll take your word there. And this is one of the goals of the intervention. So identify these quick wins and manage expectations, and anything that you will get after that then will be an extra and a plus, and you can use this to foster more engagement. But what you can't do is just not take care. This is one of the biggest lessons that I learned the hard way, because you go there with a lot of enthusiasm, and this enthusiasm is highly contagious. You get others on board, and then the truth is that any community process takes time. Community engagement takes time, and you're going to have a very limited portion of time, which is 4 months, and you're going to do your best in 4 months, but you need to make sure that your expectations can be mapped onto reality and deliver results that will make people happy. So try to get the goals from them so that they feel that this ticks boxes for them, and identify some quick wins so that you can say, okay, this is, if we achieve this, then we're fine. And then of course you will achieve more, and you can use that to fuel more engagement.
And I assume that one of the sources of frustrations in the community is the expectation of a certain good or service or event by a champion or by a local organization that has promised but has not been able to deliver. And I imagine that it has become, in some communities, ingrained into their collective emotional state, whereby they have become increasingly frustrated, indignated, and disenfranchised by promises that have not been met.
Exactly, particularly with the type of, that's why this is my tip, because these communities tend to be disengaged because they feel like they've been let down. They feel marginalized. They feel like politicians say a lot of things, but none of these things will ever reach them. And so creating hope comes attached with a huge responsibility to deliver. And so you want to be realistic. The truth is that there's something beautiful about you embedding yourself in this context already, and your presence only will create a difference for the community. And this is something that you have to take with a lot of responsibility. And this is something that you can actually use auto ethnography to see, to better understand the impact of your presence within this context. You're a student who comes from Harvard, one of the top academic institutions of the United States, and all of a sudden you care about this community. Well, this already changes the whole game.
Right.
And this needs to be taken into account into your research for the sake of transparency. And this already creates enthusiasm and makes them feel important, but also they need to know that you're going to leave. They must know.
And also being, like you mentioned, being mindful of my presence, which is a double-edged sword. Productive in terms of creating a sense of community pride, because a Harvard graduate student is genuinely invested in my community, or it could backfire by being perceived as, what is this white guy trying
You are the other. You are the other. And this is a very important thing in community work. We still behave in very tribal manners, where we're very good at identifying ourselves with a community and developing empathy within this community, and therefore rejecting those who are the other. The famous definition of the abstract concept of the other as not being equal to me, the other as being, in most cases, responsible for my problems. So yeah, this is a sort of it's a tricky one. But you're just too lovely for anybody to see you as the other. There might be some initial barriers because people have insecurities and people compare themselves and so on. But I know you're going to get close to them. But what they need to know is that you're going to leave. And this is particularly important. Well, you're not going to be working with children, but for children, this is a huge thing, because they feel like they're typically always abandoned, always left aside. So you go there and for 4 months you become a huge thing in their lives, and then you leave them again, and this creates serious problems. So
fortunately, I would be operating through the Harlem Children's Zone's Department of Community Engagement.
Yeah, this is very important.
That I collect data, I will be wearing a Harlem Children's Zone t-shirt, and I would be accompanied by one of my former colleagues who would also be perceived as a member of the Harlem Children's Zone. Therefore, when I no longer work on this project,
the institution remains.
Exactly. So the perception is of the Harlem Children's Zone, which is a wonderful organization with great resources that unfortunately has not engaged its immediate community in productive ways. So the main goal of the thesis is to deliver their services in a more effective way through means of engagement, which would then in turn have other benefits such as community pride, intergenerational interactions, and so on and so forth. But the main goal being the fact that there is, on the one hand, a wonderful asset with great resources, but then on the other hand, a low-income community in need, and how does community engagement somehow provide greater access, and through that access create different secondary goals in terms of community pride and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, it's a very cool partner that you have, and of course they can also be somehow considered as champions of this intervention, who could continue pushing some of the drivers forward after you leave the field. Yeah. Okay, Andrew, I think I have to, well, I don't think I know I have to leave, but I will send you, is there anything that you feel like you really would profit from knowing and I didn't address or I skipped?
Not that I could think of. And if anything comes to mind, I will definitely send you an email. And I'm
no problem.
I'm very grateful to have met you through Tamanani, because you're such a wonderful resource. I I haven't met anyone whose passion and expertise are so aligned with my thesis. So I hope that you don't mind if you become my remote thesis advisor.
No, definitely no. You can count on me. I love what you're doing. I think that we need to do more of this. So I will support you as much as I can. You can count on me. And I already feel like I want this to work out and to hear more about it. So what I'm going to do is I have to leave now, but tomorrow during this weekend, I'm gonna write an email, a couple emails, one with resources that I think you'll find useful, this Bill Gaber thing, this KWMC initiative with the documentary with social isolation, Quedemos, el Culebrón del Barri, and then I'm gonna write another email to intro you to Pablo Herrera Marin. Yeah?
Please don't worry about doing it during the weekend. Please enjoy the weekend and do it next week whenever you can.
Okay. Thank you very much. Take care and just email me if you need anything else, okay?
Bueno, Mara, muchísimas gracias.
Gracias a ti. Pásatelo bien. Buen fin de.
Igualmente. Un abrazo.
Venga, chao.